Okay, good evening, everyone. These microphones may not resonate too well in here. We'll call the meeting to order at this time. We're going to get into our presentation with Verizon in just a few minutes. We have just a few procedural things to go through here on the committee, so just bear with us. We've now called the meeting to order, so at this time, can we have a roll call of the members present, please?
Yes, we can. Chair Feinberg?
Present.
Vice Chair Weiner?
Present.
Member Harder?
Present.
Member Boudreau? Present. Member Foster?
Present.
Member Breckner?
Present.
Member Rondinella, maybe running late. I did get confirmation that he would be here tonight, so we'll see how that pans out. Okay, we have a quorum.
Very good. Thank you for that. We have a quorum. Now, the approval of the agenda for this evening.
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
Okay, a motion to approve.
Second.
Second, all in favor of approving the agenda as stated? Aye. Opposed? All right, very good. We'll move to new business. At this time, just bear with us one more moment. We have the minutes of our last meeting of March 19th. Are there any corrections or amendments to the minutes?
Yes, I have one minor correction under the committee comment section. It indicates that I was congratulated on my position as becoming a captain in the National Guard. Actually, the National Guard is incorrect. It's the California State Military Reserve. They are different organizations, so just out of abundance of caution, I'd like to make a change to National Guard and change it to California State Military Reserve.
Are there any other amendments or corrections to the minutes? Is there a motion to approve the minutes then as corrected?
I move to accept minutes as with correction.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor of approving the minutes as corrected? Aye. Opposed? All right, very good. At this time, we'll get into our main program for this evening, and we thank everyone in our community and some adjacent cities for coming this evening, and we hope you find this program very informative from Verizon Communications. I will let the Verizon team introduce themselves, and they're sitting over there. Yes.
Just by way of background for our guests here tonight and for the folks at home, one of the goals of this committee has been and continues to be to arrange for presentations from the local providers of our utilities and other services for folks who live in Rancho Palos Verdes. We've asked all of these providers to come out and talk a little bit about what their plans are in the event of a disaster or emergency, what their plans are to restore service, and things of that nature. So this is part of our ongoing project. That's why we're here.
Very good. Very good. And also, for those of you who were not at the previous presentations, our first one was with California Water Service, followed by a presentation by Southern California Edison, and then by Southern California Gas Company. This is our fourth presentation, and we hope at our next month's meeting to have Cox Communications here to discuss their cable operations. So with that in mind, I would like to turn it over to the Verizon team. If you'd all introduce yourselves so we know who you are. Sorry there's no lights over your table. I don't know what that implies,
but we're ready.
Get the power back.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting us here to discuss our emergency preparedness, an area that we're particularly proud of in our reaction to situations. My name is Mike Murray. I'm a Director of Government External Affairs, and I handle Southern California, from San Diego up through South Bay cities and everything to the border in a public affairs, sort of external affairs capacity. And I've sort of arranged this team here tonight, and I think we're going to be able to answer most of the questions you may have and really give you a really good overview of sort of what our emergency procedures are. So thank you again.
Hello, my name is Antonio Gaskin. I'm a local customer operations manager. I handle the copper side, and I supervise technicians that are on the copper side of our plant.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jerry Liebelt, and I am the Director for Operations for all of California. So I manage all of the staff teams, and our emergency preparedness team falls under my responsibility.
Good evening. My name is Nora Garrido, and I'm the leader for the Regional Control Center, or EOC, Emergency Operations Center, for the whole state of California.
Good evening. My name is Jerry Melton. I'm a network operations manager, and my job is to maintain the network on the wireline side of the business. And I happen to be lucky enough to live up in Palos Verdes Peninsula, and I'm a member of the Westfield Park District Board, just recently appointed. So I, as well as you, was always concerned about disaster recovery. Thanks.
All right, great. So Nora and I are going to share the presentation, so we'll hand back and forth a little bit, so we'll get it going here. How much slack do I have?
You can get that wireless. You just put that on here.
Get this one jacket. You use the back if you buy. Otherwise, you only about 10 feet. Does that work for you? Can I help you with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll just hold it and talk.
Clip, and then you can put that in the pocket.
Okay.
Try to pull as much cable in there in your pocket as you can, or
All right, thanks. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? All right. So each day, communities respond to numerous emergencies. Most of the time, those can be handled at a local level. However, in some cases, it does require a collaborative effort. NIMS, the National Incident Management System, provides a consistent nationwide template to enable all government, private sector, non-governmental organizations to work together during domestic incidents. The NIMS was established in 2004. Verizon follows the NIMS methodology, and we do that through our Business Continuity Emergency Management Team. The Business Continuity Emergency Management Team follows the framework of the 4 generally accepted phases or components of emergency management. It's mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. So if we think of it in terms of those components, we have a couple of different sections. If we think about mitigation and preparedness, so what do we do ahead of time to be prepared? The Information Sharing and Analysis Center, that's part of our mitigation and preparedness planning section. This is a center that monitors all across the Verizon footprint, looking for weather, fires, natural disasters, anything that might impact our geography. They monitor. They also provide reporting on a daily basis. I get 4 or 5 reports every day from them with different status for the whole Verizon footprint. Also part of the mitigation and preparedness are a number of different plans that Verizon prepares. We have the Business Unit Continuity of Operation Plan. So that ensures that each business unit, whether it's our network operations or our customer operations or engineering teams, that they have plans in place to deal with an incident that might affect our business and to ensure that we have consistency. We also have a network disaster recovery plan, which Jerry is very familiar with. We all have emergency management plans that would include the organization, the staffing, and the activation of our emergency operations center that Nora's in charge of. We have site emergency action plans, so each individual building has an action plan on what to do based on the particular incident. And we also have critical center plans. So we have some centers that are deemed critical. Perhaps it's a dispatch center that I also own, and that would be deemed a critical center because in an incident where we need to get technicians out, I have to be able to transmit that information to the customer operations team so we can get technicians out to where they need to be. So that's all part of the mitigation and preparedness. Then if we think about response and recovery, the National Emergency Coordinating Center is, again, a Verizon-wide footprint center, and it supports incident management function. And so what they do is, if there is an incident that is deemed at the level to activate the center, they would manage the incident at a national or global level. A couple of interesting things about the National Emergency Coordinating Center. Let me just flip back here so I get the right date. One of the pieces of the National Emergency Coordinating Center is a team that we call MERIT. It's the Major Emergency Response Incident Team. It's a hazmat team. It's actually it was established in 1993. In the telecom industry, it was the first and the longest operating emergency response team. So we've got 2 teams located on both sides of the nation, and their members come from around the nation, and they can very quickly mobilize and be deployed to an area. We also, as part of the National Emergency Coordinating Center, have a number of deployable assets. Should there be a long-term outage, we can deploy a number of temporary devices that can help provide service. Most recently, up in Northern California, there was a fairly devastating fire called the Ram Fire, and we used some of those assets there.
In a widespread emergency, how would you determine where those assets went?
I'm sorry.
So something like an earthquake, where it's kind of spread over a large geographic area, how would you determine, how would you prioritize where those assets were deployed?
So the National Emergency Center, along with partnership with our Regional Control Center, which is Nora and I, we would work together to determine, and we've got a number of these. It's not like we've got one. We've got a number of deployable assets of different types as well. So I've never actually had an incident where we've run out of them and said, oh, we have to make a decision about who gets it or who doesn't get it. We have a really strong partnership with the wireless side of the house. So we also have the opportunity to partner with them and bring in additional assets as well. Yeah. So that leads us to what does California do? So I told you a little bit about what Verizon does, and we do partner with the national teams. But locally, California, the Region Control Center, we coordinate operational and technical responses to different incidents. We can activate it for a fire. We could activate it for a large power outage. Anything that basically comes up on the radar, we can activate the center. And so locally, Nora and I and the rest of our partners would coordinate and have status meetings and plan responses. We also would partner, if it's appropriate, with the national team to bring in additional assets. And so that's pretty much an overview of how we have it set up at a national level and then at a local level. And Nora and her team are constantly monitoring what's going on in the geography. I get emails from her all day long with power outages, whether it's 4 or 5 customers or 1,000 customers. So we monitor everything that's going on in our geography so we know how to respond. And with that, I'm going to ask Nora to talk a little bit about the communication plan for the Region Control Center, because when we activate it, we have to ensure that we can continue to communicate as a team so that we can get our services restored.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yeah, we'll switch. Let me take this out of my pocket. There you go.
All right. I don't have a pocket. Well, I think I carry it here. Can you hear me okay? Okay, thank you. Well, as Jerry mentioned, we have our regional control center that also externally can be named as EOC, Emergency Operations Center. We have different all across globally, but we are in charge for the whole state of California, where we have Verizon Wireline Services footprint. And we have the primary call center or emergency response center. We have different alternatives or redundancy to ensure that we can continue communicating with our teams to be able to restore at any event that we have. As Jerry mentioned, we monitor on a daily basis different risks that may impact our services. How do we mitigate, and if we have an event that is affecting our services, try to put all our subject matter experts that are representatives from each of our business units to come together with a plan and a response and recovery of any event. our goal is always to restore our customers as quickly as possible. So in our Emergency Operations Center, we have voice and data, probably, as you all know, in all the centers that take response, we normally try to do redundancy. So we have different ways to keep in touch with all our teams internally so we can respond to that. We also have like the secondary voice, besides the regular that all we know and all we use, the satellite phones, and we have a plan in place. We do exercises to test all our equipment, same as our plans. We have high frequency radios, the shared radios. We're part of the shared radio, which is one of the tools that the Homeland Security Department offers, and we exercise that every week. And we use the GETS and WPS, which is the service that also is provided by the Homeland Security, that provides you quick access to connect to a landline or a wireless phone in case of an emergency. So in case you haven't heard about that services, it's really important to make the request through the Homeland Security and have those type of services. About the data, we really have our Outlook, web internet, and also we count with other type of networks and tools to continue in contact with everybody, and also now using the web link via the high frequency radios, which is kind of like the same that high frequency radios, voice and data. Let me move just to the other slide.
One more switch, sorry. Okay, so I wanted to just go over some big rules about how we determine, and maybe this will help answer the question you asked me. So from a corporate perspective, our number one priority is to make sure that we have communication between our team so that we can respond to an incident for anywhere in our geography. That would include making sure that our network, the communication between our offices is up first. So once we get our network up and functioning, then our second priority is the TSP, the telephone service priority. Nora will talk about that in just a moment. Then it would be essential government services, public safety services, additional network infrastructure, priorities given to us by the federal, state, and local governments, and then other services. When the federal government declares an emergency, these are not necessarily in a particular order, but these are the top priorities: transportation, telecommunications, public works and engineering, firefighting, information and planning, mass care, resource support, health and medical services, hazmat, food, and energy. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, as Jerry mentioned on the previous slide about the TSP or telecommunications services, on November 17 of 1988, the FCC established the TSP program. And this is basically a mandatory tool that all the telecommunication companies need to follow. What it is the Homeland Security Department will identify what type of service each company or government will require, and it will create a code that is requested through the Department of Homeland Security. That code will give us, all the telecommunication companies, a priority to restoration or even provisioning. We have the two types. The restoration is a priority applies when we have a new or existing telecommunications to ensure that the restoration is before to any other non-TSP. And the provisioning is when we are asked to have a priority of install and provision a circuit or a customer before anybody else, but that has to happen before any event. So kind of translate this to a regular customer. Let's think about the fire department or probably the PSAPs 911. If a PSAP is required to be installed immediately, they will probably require provisioning emergency or a priority to be installed before anybody else. Also, if they need to have been restored immediately before anybody else, they will need a code for a restoration. It could be a combination of no priority for provisioning, but a priority for restoration, or vice versa, depending on the circuit. That is not depending on us. That is completely on the NCS or the Homeland Security. Who qualifies for TSP? Organizations with telecommunications that support either a national security or emergency preparedness mission. The federal agencies that non-federal users via federal agency sponsor, state and local governments, state EOCs, police, fire, EMS. Foreign governments within our jurisdiction, like embassies, and private industries like power, gas, utility, or hospitals. To bring that to a more specific example, we can think about a hospital. A hospital is a candidate to get a TSP. However, not all their phone lines or all their circuits will qualify. They need to submit their request to the Homeland Security Department, and only the ones that are really essential for an emergency response will qualify. So the Homeland Security Department will provide them with a TSP code for that circuit. Let's say, for example, the hotline to take emergency, or any equipment that they have that they need, any data or voice service that requires the essential operations to continue doing their business. So these are the type of services that they have. And again, once we have an emergency, we have to go first, as Jerry mentioned, to protect and recover our own network, and then we need to go by the TSP. We have lists, and in our central offices, we notify what are the TSPs that are impacted, and based on that, we will start our recovery. Let me just change to the... So the sequencing for the TSP is to identify the different type of services that are coded by the TSP. So first of all, the government is telling us that the highest priority is the national security leadership. And then we have the security posture and U.S. population attack warning, the public health, safety, and maintenance and law and orders, public welfare and maintenance of national economic posture, and the disaster recovery. So we have different categories of the TSP. So you may ask, well, if we have different TSP, who's going to be restored first? We have codes that it will tell us based on what type of service do they provide for the country, for government, or our safety for our people. So we will have a code that normally, I'll show you in a little bit the code. It could be the last two codes, that it could be provisioning, not necessarily, but restoration could be one, or emergency is the top of the priority. And that will be different codes that, again, are provided by the Homeland Security. I think, let me go. Oops. So with that, we just want to kind of reinforce that we consider a very strong company with a lot of plans to be prepared to any large scale events that will be impacting the services. And we're just trying to get all our plans in place, test them, exercise them, and improve them as we go along, to improve with the technology and everything. And with that, I just want to thank you.
Don't go away. We all have questions.
No, I know.
Even though we don't read the National Enquirer, we all have curious minds and we want to know. So anyway. Okay. If there's anyone of the public who's attending here and would like to ask a question, please fill out one of the speaker cards. It should be on the podium, and we'll call for questions from the audience very shortly. First, I'd like to start with our committee members here. Are there any committee members that would like to ask a question? Tim, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. This is really good information for us to have. I think a lot of our residents in Rancho Palos Verdes are more concerned about sort of a local response. So I was wondering if maybe y'all could talk a little bit, and I understand you guys are on the copper side, not the wireless side, but if you could talk a little bit about maybe some steps that our residents could take to help ensure that their service will be protected in the event of an emergency, and if not, if you could talk a little bit about how long the average home would expect to wait to have service restored following, for purposes of this discussion, let's say an earthquake.
Sure, I'll start and then anyone on the panel can help me with that. So from a personal perspective, if I'm thinking about my home and what I need to do to be prepared, there's the basics. One thing that we would always recommend is to have a landline. A lot of times you hear about folks who just have a cell. Many times, depending on the type of incident it is, the bandwidth can't handle all that volume. So certainly always having a landline, a wired line that you can call out on is one suggestion.
Is it true that landlines, when they become available, they will give priority to out-of-state calls and long-distance calls? We've heard that in the past, and I was wondering if we could confirm that. Will those circuits be made available before local circuits? Or does it not work that way anymore?
I don't. Jerry,
Say the question again. I want to make sure I understood.
We've been told
out-of-state calls.
We've been told in the past that the long-distance circuits are made available for public use before local circuits. So in other words, if I need to call an out-of-state contact, I'd have a better chance of getting a line to Arizona than I might have a chance of getting a line to Marina Del Rey. Is that correct, or is that no longer the case?
No, I'd say that's incorrect, because the way the network works today, and has for many years, I manage the network. That's one of my jobs, and actually this is my area that I work in. So what happens, if we have a major event, a local call goes through a local office. So for example, here we have two offices in this area, one of them being Rolling Hills and one of them being PV down on Torrance. So if you make a local, let's say we lose long distance or we lose the network, a local call would still go through, because it's like a big PBX system in here. If you wanted to make a call, you could make it internal, but if you lost the link outside, you couldn't make it. So any local calls typically will survive most anything outside. When I make a long distance call, the minute I hit that one, it routes the traffic to a major tandem building. And in this case, it would route it to the Long Beach tandem. So all the traffic would go to there first and then go to the long distance network.
So then just as a follow-up, then for purposes of emergency planning for our residents, then we always encourage them to have an out-of-state contact. Would it also be good advice then to have a local non-family member contact?
Correct. Within the serving central office, so in this area, there's two, like I said, is Rolling Hills and PV. So somebody with a similar phone number, you could even check with us if you want to make sure. If you're calling on the other side of the hill, you're probably coming out of Rolling Hills. If you're closer to Torrance, you'll be coming out of PV. So it could be one of the two. So having a local contact would be good too.
Well, I think that's good advice. Thank you.
Yeah, this is very new information, because in community emergency response team training, everyone's told, get an out-of-state contact, because the local lines are likely to be out and overloaded, but you'll have better access to an out-of-state line.
Well, trucks can get loaded, and both internally and externally. They do take different paths. They do go over, like I said, you hit one and you're going to go to the tandem building and then take it out from there. So if that, it depends on the event. Right. If Long Beach has a major earthquake, you may have trouble getting long distance.
But the takeaway is have both.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, I would definitely suggest that.
And then also for the local contact, it's someone served by the same central office as you are. So if you're served by that Rolling Hills office, which I believe is on Crest Road.
Correct.
Okay, then you need to have another contact that's also served by the Crest Road
Correct.
office.
That would ensure you that, let's say we lost a Long Beach tandem, you could still call locally, get somebody to come over and help you if you needed some help, and you could get through. And again, we do prioritize 911. If we lose that traffic, we can reroute it. We can, for example, if we lose a PSAP that we can't get to, which is where the 911 traffic comes into, we can go in, reroute that traffic to another area that can take those calls. We can route 911 traffic to a local number where the PD can go over there and staff those. So we have lots of things we can do in a major event to reroute that traffic to get it back up.
Okay, and then for purposes of our residents, say in RPV and maybe some of the other cities on the peninsula, where approximately is the line that divides the service areas between your central office at the border of Palos Verdes Estates and Torrance versus the Rolling Hills office?
I don't have that exact. Maybe, Antonio, do you know exactly the boundaries?
I don't. We probably should take that as a
Yeah,
We'll
we'll
take
take
that
it
as
as
a
a take
follow-up.
back. We can get you that. We've got it mapped out, but I couldn't tell you exactly.
Okay,
I don't want
all
to
right,
give you that
that's fine.
information.
Okay, are there any other committee members who would like to ask some questions? Yes.
Well, thank you so much for speaking to the landlines because, when we do our emergency preparedness education in the community, we recommend the landline because it's always been traditional. Can you hear me? No. It's been traditional that if you picked up your landline and dialed 911, that emergency responders would know who you are and where you are.
Yeah.
So now that so many are going to UMA and voice over internet and just cell phones, we have other mechanisms for people can call LA Alert, for instance, and register their current number, their cell phone number, for instance. So, and many residents still have, the old plug-in phone. So
Absolutely.
many people, if they have a landline, have one that's it's powered by electricity. So
It's just plugged into a phone jack. You don't, yeah,
Oh, there's two kinds. You have the kind that plugs into the wall.
right.
You don't want that in an emergency if you lose power. You want one that doesn't require power. The older line, I have at my house
an old rotary
old
that
phone
you dial.
that
No,
I can, in
yes.
an emergency, plug
Have
it
one
in.
of those.
But my question is to you, do we know, you say you were from the copper side, so those old phones will connect to the copper wiring and
Sure.
Absolutely.
the call will be transmitted?
Yeah, even if you have files, it'll connect to files as well.
Okay, this
Thank
is
you so
important, by the
much.
way. I'm going to get to Tim in one moment here, but I had heard at a presentation about this commercial mass alert system, the EAS system that's now out there, that in some parts of our state, if somebody left their home, moved away, the copper lines were no longer being energized. So if someone new moved in there, they couldn't just plug their phone in. So can we, do we know for sure that here on the peninsula, if somebody moves away, that copper jack is still always energized? Are you deactivating any of them at this time?
Well, that's kind of a multifaceted question. So typically what we do, if let's say you live in a home, a single family home, and you move out, we do what we call a left-in jumper and EDT. Like EDT allows you to call 911.
Right.
So you can plug it in, you can call the service office, you can call 911. But in some cases, we may need that copper facility for the neighbor, or we may need it in another location. We may have to disconnect it from that home if it doesn't go into use within a certain month. Let's say it stays out of service for 6 months. That's a candidate to take that pair back and use it someplace else for something else.
Right, okay.
That could happen.
So you can't always be sure. That's
Well,
okay.
and one other caveat is, the cable companies are also in the telephone business, and they'll come out and they'll rip out our stuff, connect theirs. So if you disconnect from them, you're not going to get us.
Yeah. Okay, I'll turn it over to Tim, and I'll follow up with another question.
Okay, thank you.
One, two.
One more. Did you have a follow-up on your?
What would be, thank you.
Sure.
What would be the mechanism then for a homeowner to test out whether their copper wiring was still transmitting their call?
Well, I assume they don't have Verizon service, is what you're saying. They don't have Verizon dial tone.
No, they have Verizon.
No, if they didn't have it.
Oh, if they didn't have it?
Well, you're asking me how do they test it? If they have service already, they know it works. So you could grab any old telephone, plug it in, listen for dial tone, and you'll know it works.
And that's
That's all
going
you
to
have
be the
do.
test.
You could, push the button, make sure it breaks dial tone. Sometimes those touch tone pads go bad, so you can make one phone call, make sure it goes through. Would be a good test of that old phone.
Thank
also
you.
identify a jack. A lot of customers have various numbers within their homes, or at one point had various numbers. So what I would say is that they need to identify a jack before an emergency that works, so that in case of an emergency, when they go to plug in a phone, they know that they're testing a jack that actually works,
Right.
and one that hasn't been disconnected.
So in 2005, when Hurricane Katrina hit, I actually was back in New Orleans. My medical team was deployed back there. And one of the things we saw was the utility companies there brought in trucks that had lots of phones on it, 50 or 60 phones. and they would plug it in somewhere, and the residents that who had lost their home service had the capability of then going to these trucks and making calls. Does Verizon have anything like that they can bring into the area?
Absolutely, we do. And we've got lots of fun names. One of them is called a COW, Cell on Wheels. That's a smaller one. It's completely self-contained. You don't need cell service because we run it off a satellite. We've got a similar where it's got long banks of phones. We've got a number of different deployable assets.
And is that something that our local government would make a request of Verizon to bring in, or would Verizon just decide?
We would
that's
do it
necessary?
proactively.
So we wouldn't have to request it. You would
Absolutely.
just say, hey, we need
Yeah.
to get one of these.
And we would, right, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Usually what we'll do as soon as we make that initial determination about the severity of the incident that's impacted our network, this very second we understand what it is and how long the restoration is, the next thing we do is what can we proactively do to try and provide service in the interim.
Does Verizon coordinate with local authorities to get the information out where that's going to be deployed?
Yes.
'Cause I
Absolutely.
assume you can't
Absolutely.
pre-position it because you don't know what area is going to be affected.
Correct.
So you have to kind of find
Yeah.
a place where do you then talk to our government, or our city government, for example, and say, hey,
Or
we're going to put
yeah.
one of these at this high school or whatever.
Or we walk door to door. In the example I was sharing about the round fire up north, our local manager, which would be Antonio's peer, walked door to door, with flyers and stopped folks and said, hey, I want to let you know this is what's going on.
Wonderful.
We will be out in the community.
That's great. Thank you very much.
All right, anyone else on the committee like to ask a question at this time? Okay, well, let me continue if you don't mind. And once again, thank you very much for being here this evening. Some of the questions I have concern the future and the capability of the copper wire network. In CERT and some other organizations, we were always told that the copper wire phone line was best because of the power at the central office. As you know, and maybe many of our audience knows, the copper wire carries not only the data or the voice signal, but also has enough power to power your phone, whereas a fiber optic signal only carries the data or the voice, but does not have electricity or enough current to power your phone. I understand in some areas there are now hybrid systems, which are like part fiber optic and part copper. So you may have like a fiber node coming from your central office to some point and then copper going out. Is that the case here on the peninsula? So in other words then, if someone has a copper wire service, it's pure copper all the way from the central office to their home. Is that correct?
Correct. In Verizon, we have, on the peninsula, we'll talk specifically, we offer two services. We offer, copper service and Fios. The Fios service is fiber optic all the way from the central office. We have an OLT, and it's a passive optical network. There's no electronics in it. Sends you signal out to your ONT out in the field. That has a battery backup, so it will allow you to make phone calls, but off of Fios, because there's that battery backup. Now, that battery backup is only good for the voice services. Right. So and that's where you need that additional non-powered phone to take out that cordless phone you have and plug in that wired phone, and it'll work, because you don't need electricity. So you have to have that, that standard phone that does not have the need to have electricity. Now, unless you have electricity, you could use that. So keep that in mind. And so Fios is 100% in Verizon, is 100% fiber optic from the central office all the way to your home. Right. What you're talking about is probably the AT&T UVerse. UVerse uses fiber to the hub, and then from there, copper. Right. Ours is 100% fiber optic on the Fios product. On the copper product, it's copper from the central office all the way out to the home.
Okay. And then you mentioned the battery backup if you have Fios, and you said it's only good for the voice service. So in other words, you're not going to get any internet on your Fios with that backup battery.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. And then in the case of the copper network, approximately how many days of power do you have, say, in your central plant to power that copper network?
Well, the way we have very good redundancy in our central office. So that's what I manage. Now, what we do in the central office is we have, number one, commercial power coming into the building. We usually have dual power feeds coming in, A and B feed to the central office. If we lose one, we have the other. If we lose both feeds, we have diesel generators in all of our plants. That generator we test monthly. We make sure the alarm runs. We make sure everything's in copacetic. Yeah, it has diesel. We have about, in the ones up here, we have about a 10,000 gallon tank. That 10,000 gallons will run for weeks, and we constantly would refuel those tanks if we needed to. So we have that. We also have in every central office, we have batteries in there. So for example, we lose commercial power. If that generator didn't start, those batteries will hold that load for minimum 3 hours, and depending on the load on that office, at any time could be up to 8 hours. So
Okay.
that gives us enough time to get a portable generator up there if the generator didn't start. We've never really had a major outage like that up here.
Okay, so that would power then the copper network.
And the fire.
And the FiOS, okay. And that would power the FiOS all the way to the home, is that
Correct.
correct?
Yes.
Okay, then it's a problem at the home, having power there for the FiOS to work after that battery there expires.
You got about 8 hours of time, and only for the phone, typically, 8
Okay.
hours use.
8 hours on FiOS for phone service only.
Correct. Yeah, and once that goes down, now, there is, you want to mention the other thing coming up?
Yeah, we're also right now we already started last year to deploy the Streamline ONT, optical network terminal, that also has a system that you can add a D battery that will give you between 25 to 30 hours backing up power and between 18 to 20 hours of talk time. So what we're recommending our customers when they're placing the orders, and existing customers, to order that is a one-time fee, I believe of $39.99 to get the external battery backup per se, and it's a self-install equipment. So we're always trying to look for additional tools that will improve the time talk.
Okay, so for about $40, you recommend everyone with FiOS buy an additional battery, and that gives what, 24 hours of extra voice, roughly?
It's an adapter that, it's a piece of equipment and it's an adapter. So instead of using the battery that's in the current unit, it allows you to power it with D-cell batteries, which is...
Oh, D-cell.
Yeah, D-cell. So it's much easier to replace a D-cell battery than it is to call and order, the other battery.
Okay, that's good
Yeah.
to know, because we obviously encourage people to have plenty
Batteries.
of flashlights in their home, and some of the bigger ones I'll take D-cells.
Exactly.
So this is another use for buying D-cell batteries
D-cell,
and having
yeah.
lights
Yeah.
on hand. Another question I have is, we've read that Verizon was selling their California landline and FiOS services to Frontier Communications. Can you address what that might entail for our communities?
Absolutely. I'll let our external affairs guy take that.
Yeah. What's happened is Verizon has sold its landline assets, both copper and fiber, in California, Florida, and Texas. They are the last existing GTE states from the merger between GTE and Bell Atlantic. They were known as the West Area. Frontier is a national company. They're located headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut. They have bought other Verizon properties throughout the country, here in Northern California. So we're in with negotiations or discussions with the PUC now. They're requesting data and things like that on the merger, so we're going through that process now. The goal would be to have it finished by possibly the end of this year or maybe the first quarter of next year, depending on how it goes at the PUC level. So essentially, you will be receiving, if all goes well, Frontier FiOS and Frontier Copper will be delivered here. It'll have no impact on the wireless service whatsoever.
Right, that'll be still with Verizon.
Right.
Okay.
And the only impact locally would be we'll have a different name on our shirts.
Okay. And
But
just,
I think they have the same colors in their company, so.
Yeah, that's for sure. Just one quick question. Would this have any impact when the PUC decides on rate increases? Because obviously Frontier is buying this at a very high price relative to the historical cost of the Verizon assets. Would this have an impact on rates, in your opinion? Does the PUC allow the higher purchase cost to factor into monthly rates?
You can't. We don't know rates. Yeah. That's a PUC decision. So that will have to play out. I don't think it's in anybody's. I don't think it's going to happen. Personally, I think things are going to stay pretty much the way they are.
Okay, because I know the PUC tries to allow an acceptable rate of return on asset base or the investment of most utility companies. So that's why I was just wondering about that.
Yeah, we consider ourselves a communication company. I mean, we're fully competitive. There's a lot of choices out there now for everything that we provide.
Okay, that's very good.
Sure. One more question. You guys did a very nice job about talking about how you have assets all over the state of California, and hopefully, if there is a major event, it's going to be localized to one area geographically. Can you talk a little bit about whatever mutual aid agreements you might have within Verizon and with any other companies you do business with to bring resources into an affected area from outside of that affected area?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be with our partnership with the national, the NECC. If we had an incident that we required additional help, whether it was additional field technicians, additional central office, if we needed more cabling because we had a long area that burned perhaps, it would be through the partnership of the NECC where we would say, I need 1,000 feet of cable, and we'd have it here within a matter of hours. We'll fly it in if necessary. So that partnership, that's part of the reason we follow the federal structure as well, so that we have that built-in structure as far as getting additional either resources or materials.
And are those agreements mostly just intra-Verizon? I mean, when I say that, I mean, are they all just within the Verizon family, or do you have agreements with outside companies or outside suppliers also?
I'll tell you that in some cases we do, and in some cases it doesn't matter. Recently, we had an issue where we had an outage. It's the same one I was referring to, and we didn't have a path. And a path is basically how we feed that signal from the home to the world. We didn't have a path that we could restore very quickly. So we actually went out and proactively made an agreement with another company that we had not worked with before, and we connected to their network, and we were able to provide temporary service. So whether we have an agreement or not, in that type of situation, we'll go and work with whoever we need to and get service restored, and then when our own network is back up, then reconnect to ours.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are there any other committee members that have any questions? Okay, why don't we open it up to the public? Are there any speakers from the public this evening? You can turn in forms a little later as well. Okay, first speaking is Diane Rains of RPV. Go ahead. Please stand up. The mic is all yours.
It's her turn, huh?
I thought you were just going to read what I wrote down.
Speak about one fistful away from the microphone. Yeah, about like that.
Well, my question was just about the cell phone towers and them withstanding an earthquake. Is there any plans to make sure the cell phone towers are adequately reinforced?
I'll give it my best shot.
Yeah.
Okay, did everyone hear the question? Okay.
The other question was
just
about
to
the
repeat
towers.
it for the people, the question was about cell phone towers and if there had been any steps taken to reinforce the cell phone towers to help them withstand an earthquake.
Well, the cell towers use the same backup that we do in the central office. They have backup generators, diesel, so they can survive a power outage. We, the Verizon wireline side, we feed those towers with typically an Ethernet high bandwidth circuit that carries all their traffic back to whatever point, sometimes to their offices, sometimes to ours. So they do have solid backup at the cell site. We do provide fiber optic service to most of the cell sites today, which are very reliable. So this team doesn't work on the wireless side. It is a separate organization. We do work with them. Especially in the central office, we work closely with them, turning up their bandwidth. But I do know, because I've been to many of their cell sites, they do have backup. But I couldn't tell you much more than that.
And I'll just add, and Mike whispered in my ear, they are built to code. So, we have to build them to code to meet, certain earthquake standards for that. Anything else you would add?
And they're permitted by the city, so we work in conjunction with cities or whoever the governing body is with wherever we put cell sites.
Yeah.
Okay, I know this is not your side of the business, you're on the wireline side, but we've heard all kinds of different numbers bandied about on what's the typical backup battery life of a cell phone tower in a disaster. Say if there's an extended power outage. We know that your central office, we're gratified to hear that your central office has that big 10,000 gallon tank with diesel fuel and can keep the generator going for several weeks, if not more. So we're very pleased to hear that. We've heard different things about how a typical cell phone site may go down, say, after half a day when the backup battery goes out.
Well, I'll give you a few examples. There are different types of towers everywhere. There's little mini towers. If you go around here in PV, at least where I live, you'll see Sprint has these little mini towers on the telephone poles. Those don't have much backup.
Yeah.
But when you get to the bigger towers is where you'll have it. Now, the newer technology is small independent towers, little ones everywhere. So I would say they probably don't have as much reliability, but there are a lot of them all over the place. So if this one goes down, you can sync up to another one. So, they're
here on the peninsula, because of our terrain, typically we've needed to have these little mini cells all over.
Right. Yeah. By the way, I don't have good cell service at my house, and I live in Palos Verdes Peninsula. We do sell a device that's called the network extender for your home, and you can plug that into your PC, and then you get good wireless service at your home off your phone. Only voice, no data. So that's a nice thing to know if you have really problems and you have Verizon service. AT&T does the same thing too, by the way. So I would tell you on the wireless side, it's a little bit of everything. Yeah, it's not. There's no one thing fits all.
Right. Okay, but as I said, I am very gratified to hear about that 10,000 gallon.
Believe me, I am too.
All right, our next speaker. Thank you very much, Diane, for your question. Our next speaker is Bill Foster of RPV.
Hi, my name is Bill Foster. I have a question about switching stations. I always hear a lot about switching stations, and I'm important they are. Now, are the switching stations powered by, if they lose power, do they have battery backup, or do they have this generator come to it?
Well, actually, that's exactly what the central office is the switching center. Is what you might refer to it as. We call it a central office, and what that central office is, as I mentioned, we have, believe me, lots of backup. We test it every month. We make sure all the generators run, report correctly. We check for battery on discharge alarms. We check for commercial power lossage. We have, as I mentioned, we have dual power feeds. We have generators and batteries, so we're very well equipped.
So there is only one switching station for all of PV?
But there's two. We have the Rolling Hills one up on Crest, right at the top, and then over as you go towards Torrance, as you come around the bend into Torrance, to the right, you'll see right by the path there, you'll see what we call the Palos Verdes CO.
And those are battery backed up?
Yes, definitely.
And how long will the batteries last?
Well, the battery is there so when we lose commercial power, you don't lose everything. So what happens is we call it the coup de foi. When we lose commercial power, the batteries kick in, so the voltage will peak, go down, and then level off, and those batteries can hold minimally 3 hours. We're required in a central office at minimum 3-hour backup. Some can go as long as 8, but we also, as I said, the generator will kick in. Usually, as soon as we lose commercial power, the generator kicks in. Takes it about 2 to 5 seconds to take over the load. It has to get up to speed. Once it's up to speed, it takes over the load. And it will support that central office as long as we can feed it diesel into the generator.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm going to turn it over to Tim. My apology for any confusion when we were talking about a central office. I knew that was the switching station, but I knew that was the terminology you used. Our Vice Chair, Tim Wine.
Just a quick follow-up about the central office. You said there were 2 on the Hill. Do those overlap at all, or can service from one cover the area normally serviced by the other?
Typically no, because again, you think about both the fiber optic and the copper plant. We take it from the street, we run it into that office. Now, so if you're wired into that office, and let's say we did lose that office, you could not.
I was just curious, like if Office A went down, could Office B reach out and grab any of that service and take up the slack? So if the central office that serves, like my house, for example, is affected, I might lose service. The other central office couldn't make up for that for me.
That's correct. It could not.
Okay, are there any other questions from the public? Otherwise, I'm going to ask another one myself. Let's talk briefly about Verizon's DSL service. Some of us who have it have noted a number of outages, maybe like 4 or so in a year, or sometimes a little more, sometimes for 24 hours, 48 hours. Is there anything that is causing those kinds of outages, like routers or switches or something like that?
Well, it can be caused by a number of items, certainly. I guess it would depend on what you were experiencing during the outage. If it was just slow speeds, or if it was your DSL was down but you still had voice.
Yeah, it's where you have voice, you have DSL light on, but no internet connection.
Yeah, we'll let Antonio talk about that.
All right, so with the DSL, you can have a variety of issues that will cause you not to connect. Okay. All right.
Here, try this.
Thanks. All right, I don't think this is on either. All right, for the DSL, you can have a couple of issues that will cause your internet not to work. Sometimes with our internet service provider, they're experiencing an outage, which will cause you to have all the appropriate lights on the modem, but then you're unable to get to your particular website. When that happens, when you call in a trouble ticket, we hold it in a queue. Once the outage is cleared, then you should get an automated phone call or a text message if you provide a cell phone number. Then there is a different type of outage where you might be experiencing an outage where it's in-house. We have some people who look up routers to their modems to connect throughout their house. So that might be something that's customer provided. The other issue that you might have is for some people, those are network extenders, which is a little different from the cell phone network extenders. They're trying to get the wireless signal from one end of the house to the other end, and if that equipment doesn't work appropriately, they may experience like dropped connectivity. And there's other issues which really isn't an outage, it's service affecting, where you might be losing sync on the modem, where and a number of factors could play into that, would be distance. We have some folks when you're in model, the workers hit the line, which severs the line, and then we have to come out and repair that. And then it all depends on if the line is aerial or buried, and if it's buried, we have to get permits from the city. If digging is something that we need to do, we get our contractors to make the necessary changes. So outages involved a lot, and it all depends on what you're experiencing when an outage is taking place.
Yeah. Okay, and then we know and we appreciate hearing that the copper jack, the copper line will always be working in a disaster situation. Will the DSL, which also goes over that copper line, still work, or will it only be voice?
Because they run on the same cable and pair, you could have it a couple of ways. If the network is okay, your DSL and your phone should work. If any of you have ever experienced an outage with either your phone or your internet, you could have it where the phone works but the DSL doesn't, or vice versa, the DSL or the phone. DSL works and the phone doesn't. It just depends on the cable and pair and the shape of it.
Okay, but if you had backup power at your home to power the DSL modem, then your DSL would still work, all things being...
Correct. As long as the modem has power, then you're good to go.
Got it. Okay, very good.
Question, please. This is not so much in the emergency preparedness vein, but many who do have a landline are subject to many unwanted phone calls repeatedly through the day. And we've been getting some information from Verizon that we could hit star 60 or 1160, and I tried that all throughout the day today, and the request is denied. My customized courtesy is denied. So my question is, do those lines just get busy during the day, and so that call block is not available, or?
You know, actually, I just responded to your email about an hour ago. I'm going to reach out to.
Totally busted, Marty. Totally busted.
I'm going to reach out to.
Put Antonio on the spot here. I've been talking to Verizon.
When you guys order service from Verizon, we have a group that goes in and they provision the features that you're paying for. So Marty, in your case, I'm going to reach out to a supervisor in our provisioning center and have her check the feature code on your line to see why it didn't go through for you today. But yeah, technically it should work. As soon as you get dial tone and you pick up the phone, whether you do a *69 or a 1169, the feature should work for you, and you will hear like a confirmation noise or tone.
It's *60.
Oh, I'm just saying,
correct?
yeah, *60, but just whatever feature it is that you're using.
Thank you.
No problem.
Are there any other questions from members of the committee? Anyone down there? Okay, any other questions from members of the public? Yes, please. Okay, and your name, please? Tom Pedersen.
Mr. Pedersen, if you could step up to the microphone so our folks at home could hear as well, please. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, my issue here is FiOS. As I understand the conversation going back and forth, it's still a good backup provided you have power. Is that correct? It's power that's the problem with FiOS.
Well, FiOS does have the backup battery.
Yeah,
so
fine, but
it will survive the voice side of it, and as mentioned, you can buy an additional battery to
okay.
increase that.
And
length of time.
could you use your own generator?
Sure.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah, so I have a little portable generator, and when we lost commercial power in my house, I whipped it out,
Okay.
plugged my ONT into it, and I had everything.
Okay, so it is a viable backup.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all.
Okay, but the thing is, with FiOS, with the backup battery, there's no internet service, no data. Whereas with DSL, assuming you have your own power, you can,
That's correct, right? You lose internet when you lose commercial power.
yeah, okay.
Now, if you run the generator,
You should be fine.
You should still get it?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Are there any other questions from members of the public? Yes, please, stand up and identify.
yeah.
Good evening. When everything gets dark and the smoke comes in and all that, and the house is black, so there's no electricity, I can pick up the phone, I get a dial tone, and I can call out and find out what's going on. But when I pick up the phone and don't get a dial tone, where do I go to find out what's happening in your network? How do you publish outages and problems back to us? What's the out-of-band communication path?
I'll start. One thing that happens we didn't address, when all the companies come together in an emergency situation, we talk to one another. It's wireline and wireless. So I have never been in a situation where wireless and wireline were not in sync completely. And that happens with other companies as well. When we get started in an emergency, our media group gets involved right away, and we're putting out releases to news outlets as far as we can. So we are constantly updating those on sort of the situation with our network. That's one way.
I was just going to add to that. So if you pick up your phone and you don't have dial tone, normally if you had dial tone and maybe it was across the street that they didn't have service, you could pick up, call in. Normally we would have a message up front. So we identify the phone number you're calling from, and if there's a declared outage, we would say, oh, there's an outage in your area and this is the status. If you can't pick up the phone to call and get that message, we work with the media team and they make releases. If you can call from your cell phone to a neighbor or someone who does have service, they can go online and you can check for outages on Verizon.com. So there's a couple of different ways that you could get information.
Do you have direct connections to radio stations, for instance? Is that any kind of a system that you make sure will work?
Well, they would get the releases and the alerts we would send out, and oftentimes we're interviewed throughout an outage to give sort of updates on our network or a disaster.
Great, Thank you.
Thank you.
Quick follow-up to that. Is there a way for customers to opt in to text messages or any other messages that Verizon might push out over their wireless side?
Absolutely, yes.
And where would customers and residents go to get that information?
Normally, when you first establish service, they'll ask what your preferred method of communication is, and SMS or texting is one of those options. You can say phone calls, texting. And so once you sign up for that, that basically makes you available to receive any kind of two-way communication between the company and the customer.
Thank you.
Okay, a final call for any questions, members of the public? Anyone else going once? Going twice. We're going to hang up now. Okay, we'll end this conversation, or this call right now, but we'd like to thank you very much for coming this evening. We really learned a lot and we appreciated it, and I certainly have a new level of comfort for our copper wire network here on the peninsula. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take a 5-minute recess here, and then we will continue with the rest of the Emergency Preparedness Committee meeting. Thank you very much for coming.